Okay, I am so excited about this masterclass, this event. I hope everyone's having a magical portal day. And the segue from that into legend and what we're going to talk about here is every day is a portal because you are the portal. And we all do, and this is something that's very common in the spiritual space, assign so many different definitions to energies and access points to magic and our own magic. And today I have so many notes. Okay. I'm trying to rein it in. I'm trying to wrangle it in for all the things that I want to share with you. So if you have a pen and paper and you want to take notes, do that because there's just so much coming through on this topic. And at the end, I'll set aside a little time for some questions. But this experience is going to be the invitation for you into a new way of looking at yourself that is very nuanced. I think a lot of us have been around the spiritual block and we know what identity work is. And I'd love to hear you drop in the chat. What is your definition of identity work? I'd love to hear that because I do believe that identity work it lives within a realm that I feel is not accurate for how we are naturally designed to create. So the name of this masterclass, this experience is Legend, the invitation. And what I want to start off with is you are legend. Okay. You are legend. I am legend. We are all legend. And I'm going to walk you through why this is true. But first, I want to start off by saying I'm Tia. I'm Tia Marie. I am the creator of the Sonatia brand, which is like a long walk through the realms of business, identity, and magic. The brand is an experiment. The brand is a project. The brand is a lifelong journey. I believe that is how we all approach ourselves because we are legend. We are the ones walking the story and the ones writing the narrative. When we move through initiations in self-development, personal development, many of those initiations start with just the truth that we are the ones writing the stories to begin with. We have the power to change our lives, to tell better stories about ourselves, to speak better about ourselves, and to adopt bigger visions of who we are. So, what is legend? Legend within this context is a soul aligned story field. If you can see the concept of legend like a story field instead of a hero's journey that you must win, or you must accomplish something, or you must leave something behind. I believe that the idea of being legendary or leaving behind a legend, legendary myths, is so huge that we find ourselves lost in the journey of what it means to be that. A living myth, as legend, simply carries the energetic memory of who we are beyond our identity. So if you think of how we relate to legends and myths in reality, it's a story that is so transformational, so incredibly coded in the subconscious archetypal frames of life that they live beyond time. And they move from stories into archetypal frames, almost like maps, to teach us something about who we are and what is possible for us. I see this as a multidimensional pattern. So essentially, a legend is a multidimensional pattern of our becoming. If we want to remove it from outside of ourselves, what does legend do in us? It's something that we can witness, remember, and honor across time. And the conversation today is about what a dense identity paradigm actually is. What is a dense identity paradigm? Because if we are moving through narrative storytelling as an archetypal frame, a dense identity paradigm is a paradigm where we do not have the freedom to exist within the narrative without taking on the specific roles of each of the players in the narrative. So, what happens is we end up in places where the mask that we didn't even know we were wearing begins to slip. This happens so often in the spiritual seeking world. And I really feel like it happens in the mainstream collective reality, the more simplified reality where we're just a mother, we're a wife, we're a husband, we are a lawyer, we are a nice person, we're a smart person. We are a role essentially that we're playing. And sometimes, maybe for some of us, maybe not for all of us, there's a little bit of an edge that we arrive to in that pursuit where that story just is not enough. And this is like the hamster wheel of mainstream reality. I got to the end of that journey and I needed a new story. I needed to aspire to a different version of myself. And what I found in that pursuit was a spiritual realm. I say spiritual, but what I really mean is a more mythic story to tell. Because if we believe that we're capable of more and all we can see is a very limited frame for what is possible for us, our job, our companionship role, our supporter role, for the legend that we're leaving behind, which is our children, our lineage, we're so limited within that to tell a bigger story. And so we move from I am the chef of XYZ restaurant to I am a multidimensional being. What options do you have available to you? You have spiritual identity. And that's where we move into the mythic realms of the narrative journey. Archetypal consciousness and spiritual identity. That's typically where we go. So, archetypal consciousness is a collective blueprint. It gives us access to symbols, patterns, and roles that mirror godliness. So, that's what they do. They mirror godliness through mythic function and universal truth. And they're like taking you can really think about all of this in terms of movies and stories, movies and fantasy. You take the man who works as a janitor and he wakes up one morning with superhuman powers. And all of a sudden, he's gone from a nobody to savior of the world. After he makes that shift, he's got all kinds of new roles. There's a layer of importance there that is so big. Not only that, but it is his job now to use his gifts for good. And that is an incredible story. As humans, we watch these stories and we're like, it could be possible for us. I might be a janitor one day and wake up with superhuman powers. And spiritual identity offers that, like I said, through the role of godliness, of superhuman capacity. And so it gives us access to mirrors of the soul that are otherwise invisible and not available to us. It gives us access to ritual language and energetic containers. So, ritual language and energetic containers, that's really important, right? So, when you're stepping from a limited identity to an identity that has mythic proportions, you have to have access to an energetic container that can step into that role. And it acts as a bridge between the personal and the divine. You get into this place with a spiritual identity. And this conversation really is about the downfall of this, where you're saying to yourself, you're sitting, like, I know that you've done this. I've done this. I am not, I'm not just moving through a breakthrough. I am the phoenix rising. You know, I'm not just, wounded. I am a healer. I am not a XYZ. I am you adopt this like kind of godly archetype because it's the only thing that we can mentally grasp onto that carries within it a template that is required, quote unquote, for that transformation. And so it gives us a way not only to recognize ourselves across time and culture in archetypal definition, but it gives us a way to access power sources that are beyond us. In the cleanest form, if we were doing this cleanly, which very few people are, archetypal identity would be a narrative doorway into creating a bigger, better story for yourself. But the problem is that people get lost because they don't know who they are without that archetypal frame at some point. So it becomes a trap, not really a path for transformation. It becomes like this form of role play with a God language. Essentially, it follows a belief pattern or a belief system in us that the archetype that we're connecting to, because we want to be enrolled in that legendary story, that it is our truth. It's not just an essence of our truth. We start curating our behaviors, our voice, our work to match this collective pattern. Because archetypal consciousness is a collective consciousness. It's not really a soul impulse. So we end up spiritualizing like performative energy and calling it a transmission. We confuse a state of reverence that we could be holding for our own potential and the truths that are aligned with mythic levels of potential. We confuse that as a performance mask with very little embodiment, because people get to the point where they just can't create an image of themselves without consulting that spiritual identity. So all of a sudden they are the high priestess, they're the star seed, they're the mystic, they're the oracle, they're the healer, they are the embodiment of the dark feminine, they are the channel of XYZ, whatever. And this is where this consciousness just really fragments the self, and it actually becomes like the literal template for dogmatic and cult paradigms. And we wonder why. We wonder why it feels so hollow. Now, I will say that not everybody has this lens. There's a lot of people out there that completely buy into this narrative, and I'm just not one of them. But I'm always observing it. And I'm observing it from the lens of, more interestingly, like, what does it serve? How does it serve us? What is it doing as a mechanism in the field of transformation versus, oh my God, what a terrible thing? Because I've said this before, you can't cult me. Like, there's nothing in me that could be culted. You're not going to sell me. I'm not going to buy it. I'm going to watch you and I'm going to think, that's real interesting. That's a very bizarre thing to observe. But it harms a lot of people. It becomes this like meta loop. Okay, I call this the meta loop. It's literally the cult and dogmatic formula where reality is no longer being experienced directly. It's being interpreted through archetypal narratives. This happened because I'm in a priestess initiation, or my relationship is really bad because he is my twin flame, or this is my soul contract, or I'm just in a death and rebirth cycle. I'm in a descent. I'm in the void. I'm a void walker. I'm a this, I'm a this. The thing with that is that transformation at that point becomes theatrical. It's theatrical. It's the movie of the story versus actually living the story. So authenticity in that sense gets replaced by role appropriate behaviors. You're enrolled in role appropriate behaviors because the collective narrative has literally defined what it is that you should be in that spiritual identity, right? So if you're the priestess, you might be dancing around in lingerie, you might be going to tantric festivals, you might be, tempting the men and supporting women and crying with women. You might be in circle. If you're the star seed, you might be channeling light language. You might be sitting on Instagram doing, this crazy thing with your hands and speaking gibberish. And the thing that's so fascinating about this is that people eat this stuff up. And then, if you are operating outside of that paradigm, okay, so let's say that you've taken on a spiritual identity in your work in some form, and you're not willing to just take that role to town because you have integrity and you have some form of moral code and you're not trying to scam people or take advantage of people, and you're measured and perhaps pragmatic about it. If you have pause in your system, people don't buy into your story as much as they would somebody who is full out playing out an archetypal role, like the theatricalness, where authenticity has been replaced by role playing behavior, role appropriate behavior. And the thing that is so frustrating about that is you start to ask yourself, like, what is it that people really want? What is it that people really want when they come into this world, when they come into the realm of identity expansion, right? Where personal development moves from habits and mindset until maybe I have an energy in me or a frequency in me that could be more. And maybe I could explore what that is. And maybe I could share that with other people. And how could I do that in a clear, clean way? The problem and the secret to this is that people are still enrolled in that dense identity paradigm, regardless of which side of the coin that they're on. So an identity fixed paradigm or an identity dense paradigm is a paradigm that has a fixed energetic structure. It's the way that somebody relates to themselves, others, in reality, because they're holding a self concept that is over identified with meaning. Over identified with meaning. What do we make it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? And at that point, it's no longer a lens of your potential. It's no longer a lens of the story that you're attempting to be a part of. It's a limit, exactly the same as the limit you were experiencing before you chose to release your identity into a spiritual form. So the interesting thing about this is when it comes to the victim narrative, and I know we've talked about this before, I've shared this in other programs. You have the victim, the persecutor, you've got the savior, right? The victim just becomes, within this conversation in spiritual identity, the wounded victim simply becomes the healer. It's just an elevated expression of the same principle. We take on all of these self-important roles, these larger than life hero's journey, archetypal roles, in order to step into the clothes of that, to imbue ourselves with the energies and frequencies and emotions and thoughts and the ways that we need to hold ourselves within that in order to become that thing. So there's no longer a self concept in either narrative. It's the primary filter for expression, perception, and decision making. And it accumulates energetic weight in your system. That's what makes it dense. The weight comes from repetition, repeating the meta loop, the narrative loop. It comes from the attachment to the experiences that we have when we're creating within that identity, because we're attached to it. We need it to guide us. Like, we need that so desperately. Otherwise, we don't know who we are. Then the most interesting thing is the amount of projection that comes from being in this role that we are desperately clinging to, so much so that we have to overlay that identity, which is not a true identity, on other people and force the energetic manipulation of that forward into their reality. Again, back to the cult and dogmatic formula that is active. So while it is, I think, a natural symptom of the way that we relate to identity, I don't know if I would say that it's right or wrong. It's definitely wrong for me, but it is incredibly dysfunctional, energetically, physically, because it is not true. It requires constant, ongoing enforcement and reinforcement to maintain it. And that's why it feels exhausting. It takes a ton of work, a ton of energy. This is why cults, like the rules, the cults and dogma, they have to be so militant. Because if you're enforcing an archetypal identity or some kind of identity on somebody else, and it is not who they are, it requires constant maintenance and control to maintain it. And if you're doing that to yourself in some similar ways, maybe to less degrees, it requires constant reinforcement and maintenance to maintain it. The characteristics of a dense identity paradigm, which is essentially in my book, all identity is dense. All identity is a dense identity paradigm because it requires repetition as proof, constant maintenance, repeating narratives, repeating relationships. This is how you know that you're stuck in one of these experiences. And the alternative that most of us find is to form another identity to solve the problem, right? Because we are in the experience of having the same relationship, the same narrative, the same triggers to enforce who we are, most of the time subconsciously. And we tell ourselves things like, oh, this, the empath identity. These things always happen to me because I'm the one who's holding space for everyone. Or I feel this way because everyone's energy around me is so out of whack and it's just exhausting, right? Because I'm just holding space for everybody in my life. We tell ourselves that story, the identity reinforces it, and the repetition becomes the proof because we're telling ourselves that that's the way it works, and the identity needs that story to reinforce the identity, and we're clinging to the identity because that identity is what supposedly gives us power. It's what gives us access to our superhuman powers, to more of our gifts. You experience rigidity in your expression, which limits our full range of self, the full range of our experience of ourself. So certain parts of us are suppressed to remain in character. That is also incredibly exhausting. That's like the true you is like fighting to get free, and you are consistently confused about what is not coherent and where the cracks are. Like, what's wrong with the identity that I'm not feeling fully expressed and free? Because you're suppressing yourself to adhere to that archetypal frame. The energetic maintenance of this, and I've talked about this before with identity shifting in spiritual business owners, spiritual brands, people who are taking a spiritual lens, a soul-led lens. It takes so much work to stay in that identity physically, emotionally, and relationally in your life. So there's a nervous system pattern that is like hyper vigilant in service to the performance mechanism underneath all of it, propping it up. This is why we crash and burn. This is why we burn out. This is why we're tired. There's a lot in that I think that we're really unaware of. And finally, we collapse when we're in transition. So this is the thing about identity shifting. So if life initiates a new version of the self, which I assume that it would if what you believe you're doing works, right? Like if your desire to evolve in the story of your life works, and what you are engaging in, the action your life is working, then life is consistently initiating a new version of yourself. When that happens, the old version resists the dissolution of its state. And then we feel confused. We move into identity crisis. We lose access to the power that we accumulated in the last version of ourselves. Then we revert to identity shifting, constant rebranding, constant re-explanation of who we are and what we're doing, constantly searching for the higher form, right? The higher formed identity to solve the problem of the internal dissonance and energy drain, because we don't have a stabilized self-concept in the center of that experience. We're looking at it from the wrong lens, because identities are not designed to be permanent. Okay, so the dense paradigms of identity form because identity is a temporary tool. It's a temporary tool, and if you relate this back to the storytelling narrative or the archetypal narrative or the hero's journey or I am legend that we were talking about in the beginning, you're taking yourself on a superhuman story. The identities in that story are meant to be a temporary tool, not a permanent container. So when we experience an identity that brings us safety or success, some form of safety or success, and we reinforce that, then it is spiritualized in our being and celebrated in our experience. It's also celebrated collectively through the myth makers narrative, right? We celebrate the warriors, we celebrate the goddesses, we celebrate the kings and the queens and the wizards, and we celebrate all of the archetypal states. And so collectively they're celebrated. They have that like iconic status, and we're celebrating them in ourselves as we move through our expansion. You know, the wise woman, the oracle, the psychic, the healer, the miracle maker, the king, the queen. This is why I can't stand that whole paradigm of spiritual cult language where, you know, everyone calls themselves their king or their queen, or I'm searching for my king, or he's my king or my queen. It's like there's something real needy in that, where you just can't call something what it is, right? You can't just call what it is what it is. And so moving from that state, we end up in these places where what's really happening is we're just lacking inner permission to evolve. So instead of optimizing our current self and letting whatever place we were in, whatever identity we were connected to, just be released. We hold on to it and we cling to it. So the script here, or the shift here, from what I'm bringing through, is that you're really trying to move from like a legendary story, if we want to talk about personal brands or the way that we hold ourselves through expansion or evolution. We're moving from an archetype or a role into an icon. So an icon is an image of a person who is worthy of veneration. That's the actual definition of icon. An icon is an energy. It is not a set thing. And veneration is simply means just worthy of great respect or regard, which is essentially the way that we hold ourselves in our lives when we are properly positioned in this relationship. So from a business perspective, because this conversation for me is really about personal development and how we execute in a soul-led business or in a spiritual quote unquote business, is that we don't really need to attach identity to a personal brand. We don't need to cling to identity statements. What we're really craving, I believe, individually and collectively as leaders or people who are consuming our content, is people who are real. That's simply it. And this is also why we feel when people aren't. So a legend energy is an energy that we can look up to, but it's really not about the person, I believe. I think it's about the energy that they carry. It's a felt sense that we suspect when we are in proximity to somebody who is truly, truly, truly themselves. It's also a suspicion we have that the other person has walked through their inner dimensions. This is why the hero's story is so powerful. This is why every brand is supposed to have an inner hero's story. Well, everyone who's doing their TED Talk, they're telling you about the inner dimensions that they walked through. And I was contemplating this deeply about what is it about that hero's journey that is so delightful to us. I watch a lot of movies. I actually didn't watch television for like 15 years of my life. And when I say that, I'm saying like no exaggeration. When I was in my career and working like 3 jobs and my daughter was young, the only thing I ever watched, like out of the corner of my eye, was kid shows. Whatever she was watching, I didn't even watch it. I just put it on. I never watched television. And the reason why, this is actually really funny, is because I had so much work to do. This is such a metaphor. I'm saying this out loud and I'm chuckling about how deep the statement goes. I didn't watch television because I didn't trust myself to stop watching once I became enthralled in a story. Like, I was like, I know myself. I have no self-control. If I find a show that I'm hooked on, I will just watch it and I won't get any of my work done. And a couple of years ago, when I retired from my old career, I was like, I'm gonna watch some movies. And so I started watching movies, and I now have this experience where I get a lot of really beautiful information from movies. In the Guild, we have the soul cinema because I see them as archetypal consciousness downloads. You can watch a movie and really have some incredible contemplations there. I was thinking about like, beyond listening to somebody's story and having a felt sense in you because they're iconic, that they walked through their inner dimensions by telling you their story, what is it about that story that helps us know that they've died and returned? Like, why is that so important to us? And I think it's because The idea of a near-death experience is a really great story to tell. It's a really inspiring story to hear. Why? Because the people who've been through a near-death experience, they beat the odds. They beat the ultimate odds. Like, they beat death in some form. So we want to believe in ways that we can do this in our lives, in whatever death is in front of us continuously. And I think it has to do with our dominion, our capacity for dominion over survival states, like states of survival coding, like freedom from the true forces that take us under, that the dead claws that drag us down. Because I have a story like that is not only connected to literal death. At the end of this exploration, what I sit in contemplation with is that if you are legend and you are living as legend, you end up in a place where you don't have to convince anybody of your power, not even yourself. You know that you have access to your magic and you don't need to explain it to anybody else, which is also what I think that we are really looking for, because we become the frequency of it, essentially. And it simply is that there's no more mask, there's no more version of us that is separate from us. And the point of it, or the point of releasing ourselves from identity and becoming the icon, from moving from archetype to avatar, to setting ourselves on a journey of identity questing, is not to do this to dissolve into nothing, to dissolve into formless, but rather that at the end of it, that we so clearly, unmistakably know ourselves that there's nothing else in our way to either adopt or release. So there's nothing needed to give us the power to take the next step forward in our journey. Like, an icon is not somebody who's built a perfect identity. It's someone who doesn't need one anymore. Right? They're just people who are recognizable. It has nothing to do with branding. It has nothing to do with being polished, being perfect, or any sort of archetypal role play. They're just present because who they are is visible. And they hold a stabilized self-concept that no longer hides their soul. So it's post-identity work. They're free within the concept of identity work. And what they're doing is no longer performative. Everything they are becomes radiant. And I actually believe that we don't really have a lot of good examples of this in reality. I think that even stars, artists, rock stars, like people who create personas and versions of themselves, like, I believe that version of themselves that they wear to perform is perhaps an aspect of that, but we're not seeing what's underneath that. Therefore, we're still idolizing different forms of identity. Within this context, I think the icon is the soul-aligned state of self-expression that is beyond limitation, where we're not trying to be magnetic. We're not trying to reinvent ourselves. We're not wasting energy and burning off energy in the attempt to reach coherence. We're just done walking through the roles of the self. So it's the self who remains when all others fall away. And I believe that we are not ever free or satisfied until we reach that state. That's my sense. I've seen too many examples of people constantly identity shifting, constantly moving through states of confusion and creation in a way that does not serve them. I've also seen too many people stuck in rigid roles of self-relating where they're unable to move forward. And so I think on either side of the conversation, neither one of them are it. I don't think either one of them are it. And my suspicion or my theory here is that identity questing is the work that moves you through the process of stabilizing that self-concept. So identity questing is not about fixing something, which is what most spiritual seekers are unconsciously doing when they're approaching identity work. So they're asking themselves, like, what part of me is still unhealed? What part of me is misaligned? But we're not looking for the broken parts. We're looking for the unobstructed channel. And that's the shift. Every identity is a layer. It's a multidimensional aspect of self. It's not a problem to solve. You're not on a scavenger hunt for your real self. You're moving through density to find a version of you that feels like airflow. So this one shift alone breaks the addiction cycle to self-improvement and really opens up that portal to liberation and the freedom ultimately that I think that we're looking for. The notion of a stabilized self-concept, or the idea of a stabilized self-concept, if you could see yourself shooting for that rather than an evolved identity or like who you are, which is really not the right question, because a stabilized self-concept is an abstract idea. It's an intention. It's an invention. It's an idea. It is a generalized notion. And you feel what it feels like, or it lands in you because you know what it feels like to be there. It's when your energy is stable and not rigid or lost, when you can really fully be seen without performing, when you're not using like mystique or explanation to justify aspects of your power. It's when your offers and your words and your art are all flowing from the same place. It's when your life is the mirror and the transmission, when you are the mirror and the transmission, when you are resonating with people, but not only resonating, like you're having that impression in their lives, they're remembering you. You're not chasing or shifting anything to find something. You're just becoming relevant in your own story in the way that, like I said, like you are legend. You are legend energy. So the story field, the soul aligned story field, becomes the field that you are living within, and it carries within it that energetic memory of who you are beyond identity. I believe that at the end of this conversation, you're going to walk away with a really powerful insight about orientation. So not only to look at identity in different ways, and I'm going to take a moment to look at everybody's comments here in a second, but it really is about the invitation to you to find that sweet spot, to find a state of self in the center that is actually operating beyond identity. And the other thing that I will say is that I do suspect that this type of work, it's not for everybody. You have to be really solid in your understanding of what is left after you've released your need for self-definition in this way, because the ego really needs an anchor. And you can find that in specific ways. This is what we're going to be traveling with inside of Avatar of the Identity Shift, is like that stabilizing self-concept right in the beginning, to learn how to walk with that, to learn how to hold that, to learn how to reinforce that, so that everything else starts to come in. You start pulling in your mythic story. You start pulling that in, And that happens after you've created that anchor. But then after that, like the questing of the identity is the part that is fun. That's when you start the hero's journey. It's not a treasure hunt for who you are, but it's a hunt for joy and fun and adventure. It's when the stakes stop being the wrong stakes. You have to find right relationship to it. So lots of comments in here. So let's take a moment. Let's read through it. All right. Kyla says, identity work is about unraveling the essence that's always been there, yet it has been layered over with inherited narratives, systemic expectations, cultural conditioning, and survival-based programming. Jewel was on the same tip. Robin shared that this feels incredibly accurate, and I never understood it. Felt confusing. The idea of like step into your becoming feels elusive, as if it's a place to get to rather than who we already are. Yes, that's interesting because I don't think people know who they already are. So I think the becoming of who we are is the notion that it's a process and we have to stay present for the process, which allows us access to the faith and trust required in most forms of spiritual evolution or like personal expansion, because you are discovering it like breadcrumbs along the path because it keeps revealing itself to you repeatedly, and you have no other path that's been laid out. What I'm envisioning in this experience is an entirely different path. So it actually turns the whole story on its head and puts you in this completely different spot where you're no longer relating to a state of self-definition. You're relating to a cultivated state of self-stabilization, which is totally different. It's more of a concept or an idea about the self rather than a place to arrive to. And that sounds like a nuance, but it to me feels like a gateway, like it feels like a doorway to a new world. All right. So the first step in the experience is avatar the identity shift. I did put a link in the comments if you are already a part of it. I can't wait to see you inside. If you are not, it's a 21-day challenge. We're going to have live calls and a Telegram group to explore this together, and I absolutely cannot wait. And so now I'd love to ask a question. And if you want to think about it, you can always message me later because I'll be inside of my inbox. You can share with me directly. But I'd like to know how you answer the question, who are you? It's an interesting quandary. I've been sitting with the who am I as the what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Not like I am a, but more of like I am a person who enjoys every moment. I am a person who cares enough about other people to do my best to communicate. I am a person who doesn't always nail it, but I always come back. I am a person who is willing to sit with others. Like, I am a person who values you. Like, that to me is what it has turned into. And it's been very interesting to experience. It's very much about action or presence, really. Presence can be action, right? Like, you just being there is movement. I feel like that is the definition of exploring realms that are so easy because there's nothing to prove or explain. And I suspect that energy is where we're moving into in the future paradigms of um future paradigms of existence. We're going to get so overwhelmed with data. We're going to have access to so much information and data that it's actually going to help us to evolve beyond the mind, because we're going to reach a place where we realize and we get to the end of it and we didn't really learn that much different. We didn't really learn that much more. We didn't really become any different than we thought we might have been if we had all the information that we needed. And then after that, there's going to be a great edge of expression and silence and ease in various forms where the problems that we're looking to solve simply become solved through like light and frequency and experience rather than like a solution. And I think a lot of us actually come from places on a soul level where that feels much more aligned, and a large part of the frustration is just trying to get there, trying to get to the place where we can be it. And I don't think we can be it until we find that state down the middle, because I think in that state down the middle where you're just like, could say something, but maybe there's nothing to say. And then maybe it just could all be so easy. Like maybe I could just say thank you, or maybe I could just share something that coming from my heart that doesn't even make sense. And that heals or collapses the entire paradigm of density that is in essence trying to be released when we're telling these stories about our lives that are so difficult. Like we're telling them not only because we want a different story, but we're trying to get them out. We're hoping that if we get them out, if somebody has some insight to share, if somebody has something else to teach us and tell us, that it will collapse the paradigm of illusion that we're engaged in. But we could also just step into new stories. We could live life telling mythic tales of self. And I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that we get there until we've dissolved these identity paradigms. I just can say that for myself too, as being somebody who's the mind grasps at things, right? The self who remains when everything else falls away. It's like in that place, you actually get to access layers and levels of genius that are available to humanity, technologies that are available to humanity that we're looking for as the next wave of innovation. But we can't reach new innovative experiences when we're still operating with the same frames of viewing ourselves and relating to the world around us. I have a real suspicion about all of that. I have a real suspicion about it letting us access what's inside of us that's attempting to come out. Like, I don't think it gets to come out while we're still enrolled in collective identities. I don't even think we can see it or relate to it within the realm of information and language that operates from the frequency that we're pulling through. I think you have to oscillate between different layers of that, which is why it needs to be a fluid state of identity. And I also believe that this is why people are enrolled in identity wars. This is why collective reality is enrolled in identity wars, dogmatic wars, wars of belief and self-identification. The entire planet is enrolled in this in some form. Religion, gender, patriarchy, matriarchy, these are all identity wars. And so then you ask yourself, like, so we could sit around all day long and talk about who's wrong and who's right, and is it right and is it horrible, and just sifting through the absolute depravity of what we see. And it is awful. But what solves it, because if we don't see eye to eye, but we're so identified, how could you ever let that go? It informs everything, right? And so I think that the solution is that identity fluid state and a stabilized self-concept. And I think people are attempting to reach it. People are attempting to access it through gender fluidity and releasing themselves from paradigms, patriarchy, rules. Like, we're all fighting back. We're all fighting back in some way because we feel the falseness of it. We just haven't found the way where it's clean yet. We haven't found the way that it's clean yet and that it serves the right purpose. Also, with like cosmetic surgery, we're at this place where you want to look like somebody else, you can do that. You want to be 3 inches taller and go through medieval, like, it's medieval level shit people are doing to themselves with surgery, cosmetic surgery. But we really are in this avatar. We're on the cusp of an avatar era. People are realizing, like, I could just be whatever. Like, everything about identity is a concept. I don't have to look the way I have to look. I don't have to sound the way that I really am. I don't have to believe the stories that I was born. I don't have to buy into the rules about who's in charge, who's not in charge. Like, I can, pretty soon they're going to be implanting tech in our bodies. Then all of a sudden we can just learn what we want to learn. I don't have to go to school. I don't have to study the way that I used to. Like, my son is, what is even the point of school, Mom? I'm like, I get it, but he's like, no, really, what is the point? And I might have thought that when I was in school, but it is not the same as him thinking that, because he's actually on the edge of a reality where that is an entirely different situation. So he doesn't only get it, like, he gets it. And I had a theory around what I was calling the sacred identity, directly connected to his generation and branding years and years ago, because I knew that people were going to end up into this highly creative, malleable state of self brand. So everybody was going to be able to have a personal brand. If you wanted to prop yourself up as whoever, you could do it. And now you've got AI video, you've got voice simulation. Like, you can become anything. So we're moving into the realms, like an avatar era, that is so far beyond people's comprehension. And then there's people from the generation before that, like, their brains are just totally glitched. They can't understand it. They can't understand the difference between reality and what is not real because of technology. It's just begun. It has just begun. I started to work in Midjourney since it opened in Discord. I spent thousands of hours on that software. When I look at things that I created on that software 2 years ago versus what it's creating now, you cannot fathom, like, the speed at which this is expanding and the ways that people will use it. And therefore, the topic that I had on today's call, it's so paramount, because that shifting state, it has to be, we have to be grounded in that, not only so that we can utilize the potential to bring through what we're designed to bring through, but because the resonance factor of reaching that icon state through stabilizing and identity questing is actually, it's the script for what we're supposed to be doing right now in these times. That's how it feels to me. All right. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you love this. Bye.